Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Coniunctionis. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link for my book where I teach you most of this stuff, and the link for the direct consultation with me so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Mysterium Coniunctionis with Luna, the significance of the moon. There are 4 parts to this. It is 50 pages long, and we will be taking it in 4 days. So, we will be doing the significance of the moon today. Luna, as we have seen, is the counterpart of Sol, cold, footnote 168. Gloria Mundi. Okay, we do not have one till 170. It is the counterpart of Sol, cold, moist, feebly shining or dark, feminine, corporeal, passive. All of those are not bad descriptors, right? The feminine part is the void. The masculine point is the infinitesimal point of light that penetrates into. The dark is the feminine. It is passive. It absorbs. It takes into itself. Feebly shining or dark, works, cold, and moist. Those are subjective. They don't really matter. But the other ones, they really do fit very well, right? And this is the counterpoint. This is the sun is the divine spark, the divine source. The moon is that thing which the divine source goes into, the feminine part. You need to use both ends of that energy if you want to actually do any manifestation efforts. Accordingly, her most significant role is that of a partner in the Coniunctio. Coniunctio. As a feminine deity, her radiance is mild. She is the lover. Pliny calls her a womanly and gentle star. She is the sister and bride, mother and spouse of the sun. I'm going to say again that I do not comport in any way, shape, or form with this incestuous understanding of alchemy. I find it a absolutely abhorrent way of looking at it. You should not be having sexual relations with anyone that is related to you by blood, and using that as an analogy for anything is horrible. It is not necessary. It is an anthropomorphication of forces, and while we do that with calling it masculine and feminine, that is an anthropomorphization as well. This is just taking it a step too far, right? The mother has the son and then gets impregnated with the son. That is terrible. That is an absolutely terrible way of looking at it. I do not comport with that whatsoever. You are free to do what you want to do. I do not like it at all. Right? There is no reason for it. There is no reason why it needs to be. To illustrate the sun-moon relationship, the alchemist often made use of the Song of Songs, Canticles, 170. This union, the philosophers have declared in various ways and likened it, for instance, to the wedlock of a bride and bridegroom, as in the Song of Solomon, Museum Hermetica, Arthur White. Like, the bride and bridegroom, I have no problem with. Spousal relationships, no problem with. Even anthropomorphizing it into they had a son. You can say child, that is a much better appellation, right? The void was, and then God decided to become, so he became the light and went into, and then creation came from. That is the Trinity, right? Father, Mother, Son, that's good. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, kind of, right? Kind of, only kind of, right? That would be God as the Father. That would be the Holy Spirit as the agent of change or the Logos, and the Son being the corporeal body. It's not as good of an allegory as male, female, and progeny. That is better. It is the union of the masculine and feminine forces producing the progeny. That works much better. I don't have any problems with bride and bridegroom, even though that too is an anthropomorphication of these forces that really do not need that. The Song of Songs, as in the confabulation of the lover with the beloved in Aurora Consurgens. Footnote 171. The immediate model for this was probably Signor's Epistola Solis ad Lunam Crescentum, but it may also have been inspired by Cicero's De Natura Decorum, unless indeed we hold that the sun holds conversation with the moon when their courses approximate. Luna was identified with the wife par excellence, Juno, considering the moon and Juno to be the same. In Athens, the day of the new moon was considered favorable for celebrating marriages, and it still is an Arabian custom to marry on this day. Sun and moon are marriage partners who embrace on the 28th day of the month. Footnote 172. Wittenkind, further material in Eisler. And then it's just references to something else. According to these ancient ideas, the moon is a vessel of the sun. She is a universal receptacle of the sun in particular. Footnote 173. That is just another reference as well. And she was called infundibulum terrae, the funnel of the earth, because she receives and pours out the powers of heaven. 174. Stebe. The original idea is Plutarch, Isis, and Osiris. She, Selene, is receptive and made pregnant by the sun, but she in turn emits and disseminates into the air generative principles. And again, that is in comportment with my idea, right? The masculine impregnating the feminine is exactly what I am talking about, right? The blending together of the two forces, however it is allegorized, is a work. And even in turn emitting and disseminating into the air the generative principles is exactly the feminine principles that I would describe. So, confirmation bias acknowledged. All right, the next one is 176. Again, it is said that the moisture of the moon takes up the sunlight, or that Luna draws near to the sun in order to extract from him, as from a fountain, universal form and natural life. 176. Dorn, Physicogenesis. As early as Firmicus Maternus, we find the idea that the moon undergoes a kind of rebirth from the sun. This idea reached its highest development in the patristic parallel between the moon and the church, Mysterium Lunae. This is something like you are free to view it that way, and it is understandable, right? It is a direct correlation to the sun, what we get to see in the moon. The phases of the moon is directly related to the earth obscuring part of the sunlight falling upon the moon. And so that is a perfect, understandable parallel, right? It's not a literal rebirth, but that's fine. It is cycles. Cycles are good. Dark to light, light to dark, even distribution, all of that works. So I don't have a problem with this either, right? Now, comparing it to the church, there we got some problems starting. She also brings about the conception of the universal seed of the sun in the quintessence, in the belly and womb of nature, 177. Dorn, Physica Trismegistus, Theatrica Chemicum. For the Stoics, the moon was the mediatrix between the world of eternal stars and the lower earthly realm. Similarly, in Macrobius, the moon stands midway between things divine and things corruptible. Menens, in his Aureum Velis, says, but the moon, being the lowest of the planets, is said to conceive like a womb the virtues of all the stars, and then bestow them on sublunary things. The moon implants all the virtues of the stars for the generation of all things, and especially their seeds. The moon also has life-giving influence on minerals, fashioning and preserving in the earth's, bowels, the various species of stones, metals, nay more, of living things. Now, all right. There is no virtues of the stars, right? The stars do not have virtues. Astrology, there are some things to look into in astrology, but they're not really all that accurate at all. Tarot is reading the energies. That seems to work fairly well. Astrology, I haven't found a whole lot to pull out of it. I have explored at least a little bit, not as deep as I did with tarot, but there's no virtues to Gemini, right? Gemini's I am a Gemini. That's why I use that. The way that I act and the way that I know somebody that was born 2 days after me, right? We were both Geminis. We grew up together. We had similar upbringings. And we are nothing at all alike in the slightest ways. There is nothing to say that this is an actions of a Gemini for both of us. You just cannot do it. Even taking into account the two-sided nature, even taking into account all of the attributes, it just doesn't work, right? Leos, right? The Leos that you know are Leos are the ones that probably fit the stereotype of Leos. But there are more of them out there that do not, and you just don't know it because they don't fit the stereotype. And so they are completely different. There are Leos that are passive. There are Leos that are not aggressive in the slightest. There are Leos that do not live up to authority. They are not boisterous. All of the things that you would expect from a Leo, completely absent. These are real things, right? There is no virtue of the stars. There is you trying to explain something in your life by this thing that is outside of your control, kind of a victim mentality mindset. That's what I get mainly from astrology. Now, that is not entirely it, and I'm not casting aspersions on those who believe in it, right? I haven't done as deep a dive in that as I did in tarot simply because I have not seen a reason to. If there was some correlation between these things, I would investigate it more, right? I'm picking up dowsing. I'm doing all kinds of experimental things. I am open, right? I'm not restricting myself from these experiences so that I can get an understanding of what is true and what is not. Astrology does not appear to be true, right? There is no reason to believe it. And the evidence is not there. It does not bear weight. Even if you look at 3, 4 different people who are doing astrology, they will look at the exact same configurations and they will draw something else out of it. Again, I'm going to use tarot as a reference, right? When I did my investigation, it was a wide variety of people, right? And on the same day, the cards would come out almost exactly the same. This person would have these cards come out, and this person would have these cards come out, and this person would have the same cards in a slightly different way. Right? It was fairly corroborative. It was fairly consistent across the board even. It was very rare to find not that. That is a little bit of corroboration. That is a reason to investigate more. I do not find that with astrology. And so for all of this, it's just simply not for me, right? The virtues of all the stars, why does it have to go through the moon? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The moon can portray to you the feminine qualities, but it's not going to give you the masculine ones. That comes from the sun. Why is it not going through the sun as well? There's a lot of questions, a lot of problems, a lot of reasons. Now, this part, the moon has a life-giving influence on minerals. That is entirely possible. It is a magnetic influence, but it's not forming them right now, right? That was most of them. Most of the minerals, most of the valuable things that we would consider the stones and metals and things, those were created with the planet. There is some formation that happens afterwards, but there's not going to be a whole lot of influence from the moon there. But when you get to living things, that absolutely is influenced by the moon. You are influenced by the moon. Your cycles go with the moon. You may not realize that if you have not tracked that, but there will be a tendency towards the new moon to be a little bit less composed, a little bit less put together, or more with the new moon, less with the full moon. So there is at least a little bit of influence there, right? You go to an emergency room on the full moon, it will definitely be evident to you. This is a different day than the new moon. Go on both days and just watch. You can see it for yourself. So there is some influence from the upper heavens. But how much is coming from Sirius and what's another one? Andromeda, right? Who knows? There is no way to accurately portray that influence at all. Anybody that tells you that there is not being honest with you. Now, can you read energies? Yes. Can astrology give you energies? Possibly, but I have not seen evidence of that. Right, even with, like, I've not done an extensive one like I did with the tarot, right? Tarot was about 3 months of me for several hours a day investigating a whole lot of people. But I have done at least a small on astrology. I will watch two or three giving just astrology. I don't do tea leaves or coffee or that crap. That is entirely too subjective. But I'd watched several people do astrology, and there was no comportment between them, and none of the things that they said bore out. None of them. With tarot, that was not the case. The things that was said, that was repeated across several channels in accordance with each other, pretty much came true. And that wasn't even subjective things. That was pretty objective things. They told me my leg was going to be broken if I would have paid attention. Again, that's not even just me reading back into it. It was fairly obvious. I was just dumb. All right, let's get back into the text. That's a hell of a detour there. In this respect, there is a certain analogy between the moon and the earth, as stated in Plutarch and Macrobius. We will point out again that Plutarch did not have a great understanding. 178. Plutarch, the phase of the moon. Macrobius, Insomnia Scriptorium 111, and Orphic Fragment, Another Earth. Aurora Consurgence says that the earth made the moon. 178. A. Page 125. Okay. All right, now, once again, I will point out that there is a legend that comports with this. There is a legend that records this, not just says it, right? It is, once upon a time, the earth was bigger. It was called Tiamat, according to this legend. And there was something that came from outer space. It could have been an asteroid. It could have been a comet. It could have just been a plasmic discharge from the sun. But something came and knocked a chunk off of the earth, which then formed the moon. There are legends from peoples, but I do not remember which peoples, that they saw this happen, that it was a thing that occurred that they recorded. I do not put that outside of the realm of possibility, especially considering that right past us in space is the asteroid belt, right? And that asteroid belt came from somewhere. It is in comportment with our orbit, which is a little bit wild. There is no reason why that should be there if there was not some type of a collision at some point in space. There is no reason why these asteroids would not be pulled either towards the sun because of their mass and the mass of the sun, or towards Jupiter and Saturn, which equally have mass that would pull them towards it. Now, would it be quick? No, but they would not be where they are now. That is just simply physics. And so there is a highly likely possibility, if it didn't strike Earth and create this, that it was another planet out there and that we watched it blow up, right? Now, that is not verifiable fact. That is based off of legends, so it's in the realm of speculation, but it is recorded. And so the earth made the moon. And here we should remember that Luna also signifies silver. But the statements of the alchemist about Luna are so complex that one could just as well say that silver is yet another synonym or symbol for the arcanum, Luna. Even so, a remark like the one just quoted may have been a reference to the way in which ore was supposed to have been formed in the earth. The earth receives the powers of the stars, and in it the sun generates the gold. The aurora consurgence therefore equates the earth with the bride. I am that land of the holy promise. 179. That is page 141. Or at any rate, it is in the earth that the Hieros Gamos takes place. Footnote 180. He desires to lie with his mother in the midst of the earth. I hate that. Vignerius says, and the heaven of uncorruptible bodies and the seat and vessel of things that change not is the moon, which rules over moisture and represents water and earth. Earth and moon coincide in the albedo, for on the one hand the sublimated or calcined earth appears as terra alba foliata, the sought-for good like white as snow. Footnote 181. When thou seest the earth as white as snow, the ash is extracted from ash and earth, sublimed and honored. The white foliated earth is the good that is sought. This absolutely can be physical alchemy. Right? Whenever you are sublimating, you are burning off pieces that can produce this white ash. The ash would be the thing that you are looking for in the physical alchemy in this particular instance. It is not necessarily a allegory for spiritual things. It can be, most of alchemy is, but it is not necessarily. Sought for good like the whitest snow, and on the other hand, Luna, as mistress of the albedo, 182. For the first work is 'twas the whitening in the house of the moon, is the feminine alba of the Coniunctio, 183. The Servus Rubicundus, red slave, and the Femina alba, white woman, form the traditional pair. The whiteness occurs also in Chinese alchemy and is likened to a virgin. The white lives inside like a virgin. For the whiteness of the moon, Whitkin's translation of Songs, 610. Who is that, rising like the moon, beautiful as the whiteness? Labana, whiteness, a designation for the moon in Isaiah. The moon is white. Okay? And as the mediatrix of the whitening. Now, it is important to note that as the representative, being white is not going to be right for the feminine, right? It would be dark, but the moon is in the void. The blackness of space is the void. It is the representative of the void because at night you can see the void, in the day you cannot. And it is the solar object or the extra earth object that is within our view, well, during the night when the void is there. And so the white is not the feminine aspect. The masculine aspect is white. It is the part that penetrates the darkness. And so while the moon is white, it is not spiritually white. The lunar sulfur is white, as already mentioned. The plenilunium full moon appears to be especially important. When the moon shines in her fullness, the rabid dog, the danger that threatens the divine child, is chased away. 185. That is just a reference to another book. When the moon shines in her fullness, the rabid dog that threatens the divine child is chased away. Have you ever been in a full moon? Right? Like I just said, the reason we have the word lunatic, right? The whole reason we have the word lunatic is because the full moon makes you act crazy. How is that chasing away the rabid dog? That would be summoning the rabid dog, if anything else. And that doesn't mean you succumb to it, but that is the pattern, right? That is not me subjectively observing. This is something that is a phenomenon. Every nurse, every doctor, every emergency response technician will tell you that the incidence increases during the full moon, not the new moon. In Senior, the full moon is the arcane substance. In ancient tradition, Luna is the giver of moisture and the ruler of the water sign Cancer. Myers says that the Umbra Solis cannot be destroyed unless the sun enters the sign of Cancer, but that Cancer is the house of Luna, and Luna is the ruler of the moistures. Footnote 186. It says juice, sap, etc. 186. That is a reference. All right, we'll come back at 188. According to Aurora Consurgens 2, she is herself the water, the bountiful nurse of the dew. 188. Concilia conigui. Similarly, Rosinus ad serat. Moisture from the dominion of the moon, Macrobius says. But there is a certain property in nature, and the light then flows from it, which moistens bodies and bathes them as with a hidden dew. All right, now, moisture is attributed to the moon because of dew, right? Dew is not because of the moon. It is because of the temperature and the relative humidity. That was not something that was known. It is something that we do know. I have extensive understanding of that. I was trained by the Navy to do wet bulb and dry bulb and all of the things that is required for relative humidity. Now, that is one of the things that I had to do while I was in the Navy. And so I do know about this. And when the temperature comes down and the dew point is high, then moisture condenses. When the sun goes down, the temperature comes down, but the relative humidity can remain high. I know that for sure because I live in South Louisiana and we are the armpit of the world. I mean, it is more hot and humid here than pretty much anywheres. I have been in the Middle East and it's hot. It is hot, but it's not humid. I mean, out here in Louisiana, we got hot and humid. So hot and humid that it is like walking into soup. Many days during the summer, for about 6 to 8 months. It is a little bit unbearable down here. I mean, I love it because it doesn't snow. So I don't have a problem with it. I stay in the house a lot anyway. I'm getting off track. Let's get back. But I do know something about dew and moisture and all of those things. And it is not because of the sun or because of the moon. Right? The moon just happens to be there. Rahner, in his Mysterium Lunae, shows the extensive use which the Church Fathers made of the allegory of the moon dew in explaining the effects of grace in the ecclesiastical sacraments. I do not doubt that because they will use anything opportunistically to keep their control system going and you subjected to it. Here again is the patristic symbolism exerted a very strong influence on the alchemical allegories. Luna secretes the dew, or sap, of life. This Luna is the sap of the water of life which is hidden in Mercurius. 189. That is nothing. Alright, we'll be back in a minute. Even the Greek alchemists supposed there was a principle in the moon which Christianos calls the ichor of the philosopher. That is 190 and 191. 190. Christianos is not a proper name, but only the designation by which an anonymous Christian philosopher was known. He was said to have been a contemporary of Stephen of Alexandria and would thus have lived in the reign of the Emperor Heraclius in the turn of the 6th century. 191, he compares it to the ever-flowing fount of paradise. In Macrobius, Luna is the author and creator of mortal bodies, and the vegetative principle, that is, growth, comes to us from the roundness of the moon. And again, that is completely understandable. The cycles of the moon are a very good way of knowing when the seasons are going to change. It is probably one of the very first things that was observed by humanity. Hey, look, this moon has a cycle. I wonder if we can track it. And then they track it and they discover that every 3 cycles of this moon, there is a new weather pattern that emerges. That is something that has been vitally important to humanity. And so it is perfectly understandable that we say that growth comes from the roundness of the moon. But it is not, right? It is correlative, but it is not causative. It is not the moon causing it. It's just a way of tracking it. All right, back to the text. The relation of the moon to the soul, much stressed in antiquity, 192. The moon receives the souls of the dead. That's hell, I guess. It wouldn't have been to the Greeks. Hegemonius, acta archeli. The soul comes from the moon. The moon produces the soul for man's generation. So, the moon is God. Okay. Yeah. Plutarch, the face of the moon. Further material in Capel. And again, not surprised to see Plutarch giving wrong information. Further material in Capel, de luna stellis lactio orb animarium sedibius. And again, that is not to cast shade upon him. He just did not have the lens of history that we have to look back on things. The relation of the moon to the soul, much stressed in antiquity, also occurs in alchemy, though with a different nuance. Usually it is said that from the moon comes the dew, but the moon is also the aqua morifica. Footnote 193. Mercurial water of the moon and fount of the mother. That extracts the souls from the bodies, or gives the bodies life and soul. Together with Mercurius, Luna sprinkles the dismembered dragon with her moisture and brings him to life again. Makes him live, walk, and run about, and change his color to the nature of blood. Footnote 194. Albertus Magnus. As the water of ablution, the dew falls from heaven, purifies the body, and makes it ready to receive the soul, because dew falls on a child in the mother's womb. What was that note? 195. All right. That is just a reference to something else. We'll be back at 197. It makes it ready to receive the soul. In other words, it brings about the albedo, the white state of innocence, which, like the moon and a bride, await the bridegroom. As the alchemists were often physicians, Galen's views must surely have influenced their ideas about the moon and its effects. Galen calls Luna the princeps, who rightly governs this earthly realm, surpassing the other planets not in potency but in proximity. He also makes the moon responsible for all physical changes in sickness and health, and regards its aspects as decisive for prognosis. All is a big word. Even if the moon was responsible for some, it would not be responsible for all. The age-old belief that the moon promotes the growth of the plants led in alchemy not only to similar statements, but also to the curious idea that the moon is itself a plant. Thus, the Rosarium says that Sol is called a great animal, whereas Luna is a plant. 196, no, we're back at 197. In the alchemical pictures, there are numerous sun and moon trees. Footnote 197. See Psychology and Alchemy, figures 116 and 188. Also, the sun and moon trees of the House of the Sun in the Romance of Alexander. Perhaps you would like to see the most holy trees of the sun and moon, which will declare the future for you. All right. In the Super Arboreum Aristotelius, the circle of the moon perches in the form of a stork on a wonder-working tree by the grave of Hermes. Galen explains the Arbor Philosophica as follows. 199. Naturally, an alchemistic pseudo-Galen. Galen is credited with having written a Liber Secretorium, to which unfortunately I have no access. Explains the Arbor Philosophica as follows. There is a certain herb or plant named lunatica or borissa. 200. Ducange gives. Molix. The herbal of Tabernaemontanius mentions this Greek that I cannot translate. Paganium Sylvester called this by Galen hermorout, often confused with hemlock. A cure for epilepsy and melancholic fantasies, makes sleepy and drunken like wine, and is used in love potions. Dioscorides says that Ruta silvestris is called Mali in Cappadocia and Galatia, neighboring regions of Asia. Galen states, Moli, Ruta silvestris, has a black root and a milk-white flower. For Mali, see Rainer. And it's German. Lunatic or borissa, whose roots are metallic earth, whose stem is red, veined with black, and whose flowers are like those of marjoram. There are 30 of them, corresponding to the age of the moon and its waxing and waning. Their color is yellow. Footnote 201. Aurora consurgens. The yellow flowers are reminiscent of the cherry, the miraculous herb of Paracelsus. Paracelsus and a spiritual phenomenon, paragraph 171. In his Labyrinthus Medicorum, Paracelsus mentions the lunatica. Thus, there is in the lunatica the whole course of the moon, not visible, but in spirit. Another name for the lunatica is lunaria, whose flowers Dorn mentions, attributing them to miraculous powers. Footnote 202. He calls the flowers most familiar to the philosophers, congeries Paracelsi. Kunrath says, from this little salty fountain grows also the tree of the sun and moon, the red and white coral tree of our sea. Right? So red and white is not going to be the same tree. Which is that same lunaria, and whose salt is called Luna Philosophorum el Ducido Sapientium, sweetness of the sages. 203. Now the other one was red and black, right? That's why I said that. Right? There is a wide variety of colors being attributed here. 203. That is nothing. All right. The allegories super liberum turbe describes the moon plant thus. In the lunar sea, 204, I have not been able to find a parallel for Maris Luna. C always signifies the solvent. In example, the aqua permanens. In it, soul bathes, is immersed or drowned, often alone. The parallel to Luna in the bath, as we have shown above, is Diana. But she never drowns in her bath because she is the water itself. In the lunar sea, there is a sponge planted, having blood and sentience. Sensum, 205. Spongia means not only sponge but also pumice stone, which has the same porous structure. Thus, the Liber Quatorum says, but that which is a vapor or subtlety in these pots is retained only by a hard body, and whenever there is a stone which surrounds the substance like a sponge, possibly referring to this passage in Mylius, writes, the sun and moon are calcined philosophically with the first water, that the bodies may be opened and become spongy and subtle, and the second water enter more easily. Roland takes over from Dioscorides. The differentiation of sponges into male, one species of which is called tragos, goat, and female. Their ashes were used as a stypic. Roland adds, from Avicenna, that sponges have souls, by which he probably meant the vapors they produce when they are warmed. But then for the alchemist, anima always had a special meaning, which Avenza formulates as follows. The higher pot is the soul, which quickens the whole stone and makes it live again. Roland stresses that sponges have understanding because they contract when they hear a noise or are touched. He regards the sponge as a zoophyte, neither animal nor vegetable, but having a third nature. It is indeed a vegetable, right? It is a plant. The sponge that grows in the sea is a plant. We have one that we grow. I cannot remember the name of it. I can't remember the name of it, but there is one that grows on the land as well, right? The sponge was the original. That is where we get sponge from. It is a plant that grows, but the original sponges were made from that plant that was in the ocean. Right? It went down, they dived, they got it. Then we had the other one that you grow on the earth, and I cannot remember the name of. But it is indeed something that grows. Because it is something that grows, it is very easy to assume that it has a soul, even if that soul does not comport with us. Pumice stone, not as much, right? That is not going to be a vegetable. It is not going to be an animal. It is a mineral. It is formed from the cooling of magma. And so that's not going to have a soul in the way that we would identify it, although it is on the elemental plane of existence, and so it has its own magnetics. All right, we'll be back at 207. Having blood and sentience in the manner of a tree that is rooted in the sea, and moveth not from its place. If thou would handle the plant, take a sickle to cut it with, but have good care that the blood floweth not out, for it is the poison of the philosophers. From all this, it would seem that the moon plant is a kind of mandrake, and has nothing to do with the botanical lunaria, honesty, in the herbal of Tabernaemontanus, in which all the magico-medicinal properties of plants are carefully listed. I'm going to pop that one out because I am interested in alchemy, and I'm going to see if I can find it. There is no mention of the alchemical lunatica or lunaria. On the other hand, it is evident that the lunatica is closely connected with the tree of the sea in Arabian alchemy. Footnote 207. Cf. Psychology and Alchemy, where the text of Abul al-Qasim is cited in Homeyard's translation. In Arabian alchemy, and hence with the Arbor Philosophica, footnote 208, see Psychology and Alchemy, figures 122, 131, 135, 186, 188. Ventura. The roots of its ores are in the air, and its summits in the earth, and when they are torn from their places, a horrible sound is heard, and there follows a great fear. Wherefore go quickly, for they quickly vanish. This obviously refers to the mandragora, which shrieks when it is pulled out. See the Philosophical Tree, paragraphs 380. I am unaware if that is true or not. I know that it was a legend. I have not dealt with a mandrake plant for myself. There are conflicting reports, and so I do not know at all whether it actually screams. It is possible that there is some kind of a pressure differential that causes vapor escape. There's all kinds of things that can cause shrieking. It is not necessarily because it is breathing and speaking. And hence with the Arbor Philosophica, which in turn has parallels with the Kabbalistic tree of the Sephiroth, which is pretty useless. 209. Here, the tree is God himself. The purpose of the creation was that God should be known as Lord and Ruler, he, the stem and root of the world. Zohar 1, as cited by Hamburger. Yosef Gikatila says, know that the holy names of God found in the scriptures are all dependent on the four-letter name Yahweh. It is. That is definitely something you should pay attention to. Check out the Bible study. Should you object to the name Eya, and it is the ground and the source, know that the four-letter name may be likened to the trunk of a tree, whereas the name Eya is the root of this tree. From it, Aya. Aya is the I am sound, right? This is misspelled. That's why I had a problem. Like, if you go back to Genesis, God did not say, let there be light. He said, Aya, light. Right? That is a mixture of the two languages. But he said, Aya, I am. He said, I am, which is what Aya is. It is not just I am, but it is I am. That is important. He said, I am the light, and he became the light, and Aya, the light was good. That is also what it means. And so there was no let there be, right? There was Aya, the sound of the word of creation. That is the sound of God, right? Not the name, but the sound. There is a difference, a major difference. If you are saying Yahweh, any of the variations of this particular word, you are probably going to be aligned with a demon. Should you object that the name Aya is the ground and source, know that the four-letter name may be likened to the trunk of a tree, whereas the name Aya is the root of this tree. From it, further roots and branches extend in every direction. Of the crown, Kather, it is said, it is the source which makes the tree fruitful and drives the sap through all its arms and branches. For you, Lord of the worlds, you who are the ground of all grounds, the cause of all causes, you water the tree from that source which, like the soul in the body, spreads life everywhere. All right. And with the tree of Christian mysticism and Hindu philosophy is 210 and 211. 210. John of Roysbroek says of the tree of Zacchaeus, and he must climb up into the tree of faith which grows from above downwards, for its roots are in the Godhead. This tree has 12 branches, and there are 12 articles of faith. The lower speak of the divine humanity and of those things which belong to our salvation of soul and of body. The upper part of the tree tells of the Godhead, of the Trinity of persons, and of the unity of the nature of God, and the man must cling to that unity in the highest part of the tree, for that is where Jesus must pass with all of his gifts. All right, let's piss somebody off. There is absolutely no reason to take that allegory from the story that is given in Luke. At all. At all. There is no reason to have 12 branches or 12 articles of faith that are drawn from that. There was no number 12 in that verse. There is no way to extrapolate any of this except by self-insertion. You have already decided that your belief system must apply to everything, and so you can find your belief system in everything. It is why I say so very often, confirmation bias acknowledged, right? Because I am looking for confirmation, but I want to acknowledge that I am looking for that confirmation so that if I am self-inserting, somebody can correct me. And I am here for correction as well. It just has to be real correction. It can't be, well, you just didn't read the Bible. Yes, I did. Quite extensively. Right? There is absolutely no reason to pull this allegory at all from the story of Zacchaeus. At all. None. Footnote 211. Katha Upanishad. There is that ancient tree whose roots grow upward and whose branches grow downward, and indeed is called the Bright. That is called Brahman. That alone is called the Immortal. All worlds are contained in it, and no one goes beyond. That is probably closer to the actual tree. Rollins remarked that the sponge has understanding, and Kuhn Roths that the essence of the lunaria is the sweetness of the sages, point to the general idea that the moon has some secret connection with the human mind. Footnote 212. And again, I refer you to the word lunatic. Footnote 212. The Sanskrit word manas means mind. It includes all intellectual as well as emotional processes and can therefore mean, on the one hand, understanding, intellect, reflection, thought, etc., and on the other, soul, heart, conscience, desire, will, etc. Manas is an organ of the inner soul, or Atman. Rig Veda 10:90-13 says, the moon was gendered from his mind, and from his eyes the sun had birth. This refers to the two eyes of Purusha, the macrocosmic primordial man, Anthropos, who created the world by transforming himself into it. A very primitive concept which perhaps underlies the generation by adaptation mentioned in the Tabula Smaragdina. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, when the mind has become freed from death, it became the moon. Translated by Max Muller. The alchemists have a great deal to say about this, and this is the more interesting as we know that the moon is a favorite symbol for certain aspects of the unconscious, though only, of course, in a man. In a woman, the moon corresponds to consciousness and the sun to unconscious. There is no reason to say that. None. Right? That is ascribing sex in the wrong way to the elemental forces. There is no reason to believe whatsoever that it is contradictory forces of understanding, that there are different significances to the consciousness of individual people based upon their genitalia. There is no reason to believe that at all for any reason. This is due to the contrasexual archetype in the unconscious, anima in man and a mus in woman. In the gnosis of Simon Magus, Helen, Selene, is Sapientia, that is 213 and 214, and we'll go ahead and get this word, which is 215. All right, 213 is Bousset, Hauptproblem der Gnosis. Evovola means thought, conception, reflection, view, also meaning as contrasted with thoughtlessness. Could be translated by the modern terms insight and consciousness, while a vola is, in certain places, for instance in the Corpus Hermeticum, fittingly rendered by unconsciousness. In Orphism, Selene is the all-wise maiden. All right, where were we? We need 214 and 215 as well. Okay, and both of those are, well, 215 is notion, invention, purpose, and design. Oh, wrong button. All right. The last designation also occurs in Hippolytus, for Epinoia herself dwelt in Helen at that time, 216. That is just a reference. All right. In his great explanation, Simon says, there are two offshoots from all the aeons, having neither beginning nor end, from one root, and this root is a sudden power, an invisible and incomprehensible silence. One of them appears on high and is a great power, the mind of the whole, who rules all things and is male. The other, below, is a great thought, a female giving birth to all things. Standing opposite one another, they pair together and cause to arise in the space between them an incomprehensible air, without beginning or end. But in it is a Father who upholds all things and nourishes that which has beginning and end. This is he who stood, stands, and shall stand. the masculo-feminine power after the likeness of the pre-existing boundless power, which has neither beginning nor end, abiding in solitude. Footnote 217. That is just a reference to another book. All right. This passage is remarkable for several reasons. It describes a Coniunctio solis et lunae, which Simon, it seems, concretized in his own life with Helen, the harlot of Tyre, in her role as Ishtar. As a result of the pairing with the soror, or filia mystica, there was begotten a masculo-feminine pneuma, curiously designated air. Since pneuma, like spirit, originally meant air in motion, this designation sounds archaic or else deliberately psychophysitic. It is evident, however, that air is used here in the spiritual sense of pneuma, since its progenitors bear names. Vus, Evola, Epivola. We have a noetic character and thus pertain to the spiritual sphere. Of these three names, nous is the most general concept, and in Simon's day it was used indiscriminately with pneuma. That would be knowing, being the spirit moving. And noia and epinoa mean nothing that could not be rendered just as well by nous. They differ from the latter only in their special character, emphasizing the more specific contents of the inclusive term nous. Further, they are both of the feminine gender required in this context, whereas nous is masculine. All three indicate the essential similarity of the components of the syzygy and their spiritual nature. Anyone familiar with alchemy will be struck by the resemblance between Simon's views and the passage in the Tabula Smaragdina. And, as all things proceed from the one, through the mediation of the one, so all things proceed from this one thing, by adaptation. 218. Ruska rightly rejects adaptione as a variant. By things, the alchemists understood substances. The adaptation process is reminiscent of the notion, found especially among the Australian Aborigines, that the original being changed himself into the things and creatures of this world. That is also what I believe. The striking use of the neuter pronoun, illud, is easily explained by the hermaphroditism of the product, which is constantly stressed. And that is not a literal hermaphrodite, right? That is the masculine and feminine in conjunction. That's the hermaphroditism. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind has carried it in his belly. 219. Ruska, Tabula Smaragdina, says, Senior says of this text, air is a mediator between fire, soul, and water, luna, by reason of its heat and moisture. Air is the life of everything. The son of wisdom is born in the air. Now, if you are familiar with my theory of the logos, my understanding of the logos, not really a theory, I know. This comports, right? This fire being the primal essence, right? The spirit was, and the spirit was as air, right? All of the elements, none of them combined, that would be the air that is floating around you. Although there are elements combined in the air around you. Especially in South Louisiana, we have water free flowing in our air. It is like walking into soup, I promise you. And so it begins with the air that was existent, and then came the fire, which began the process of the combinations, and from the combinations derived water. That is how my understanding of this works. It is here confirmed, confirmation bias. This is exactly what I would expect to see. All right. Since all things proceed from the mediation of the one, this is true also of Sol and Luna. And also, if you want to know how all things proceed from the one, I do have a video on that. It will be linked. It is going to be the one solo video that is linked. The Divine and the Trinity Explained. This is true also of Sol and Luna, who are thus endowed with the originally pneumatic character. They stand for the primordial images of the spirit, and their mating produces the filius macrocosmi, the entirety of creation. Soul and Luna in later alchemy are undoubtedly arcane substances and volatilia. An example, spirits. 220. Senior. Spirit and soul, when they shall have been boiled down in the repetition of the distillation, will be mixed together in a universal mixture, and the one will retain the other, and they will become one. One in subtlety and spirituality. Wrong button. I'm going to move this. All right. That'll work. All right. We will now see what the text have to say about Luna's noetic aspect. The yield is astonishingly small. Nevertheless, there is the following passage in the Rosarium. Unless you slay me, your understanding will not be perfect, and in my sister the moon the degree of your wisdom increases, and not with another of my servants, even if ye know my secret. Footnote 221. Nisi and ferrectus intellicus vestor non auretus perfectus, in et sorere mea luna crescit gradus sapentiae vestre, et non cum alio excelvius mis, et si scoritia secretium mum. The servants refer to the planets and the corresponding metals. Mylius copies out this sentence uncritically in his Philosophica Reformata, 222. Page 175. Here he cites this sentence as coming from the Epistola Solis ad Lunam, which is in Senior de Chimica, but it does not occur there. Interesting. Both he and the Rosarium give the source as the Metaphora Bellini del Sole, 223. Mylius, that is just a reference. The Dicta Bellini are included in the Allegories Sapentium, but there the passage runs. I announce therefore to all you sages that unless ye slay me, ye cannot be called sages, but if ye slay me, your understanding will be perfect, and it increases in my sister the moon according to the degree of our wisdom, and not with another of my servants, even if you know my secret. That's the same passage, right? Yeah, pretty close. All right, this is going to be slaying the ego. Right, that is what the understanding is going to be in this. Unless you slay me, that is going to be your will, kind of. That is submitting yourself to the authority of the higher powers. For me, that is fairly obvious. It may not be to other people, right? That is because of my understanding. Unless you slay me, you cannot be called sages. That is slaying your pride. That is slaying your worldly desires. That is coming into accordance. Now, the moon and the other servants, they're not all that important, really. Footnote 224. That is a lot of Latin again. I am not going to read that one this time. All right. Bolinius, as Ruska is probably right in conjecturing, is the same as Apollonius of Tyana, 225. Other corruptions of the name are Bolimus, Bolinius, Balinus, Bellus, and Bonellus. We'll be back at 227. The Apollonius of Tyana, to whom some of the sermons in the Turba are attributed. In Sermo 32, Bonellus discusses the problem of death and transformation, likewise touched on in our text. The other sermons of Bonellus have nothing to do with our text, however, nor does the motif of resurrection, on account of its ubiquity, signify much, so that the dicta, in all probability, have no connection with the Turba. A more likely source for the dicta would be the Heronite treatise of Artephius, Clavis Majoris Sapentiae. Our master, the philosopher Bolinius, said, set your light in a vessel of clear glass, and observe that all of the wisdom of this world revolves around the following three. 227. The three refers to the three ways of combining souls. In the body, in the soul, and in the spirit. Body, soul, spirit would indeed be the three. And again, but one day my master, the philosopher Bolinius, called me and said, my son, I hope that thou art a man of spiritual understanding, and canst attain to the highest degree of wisdom. 228. That is just a reference to something else. Then follows an explanation about how two contrary natures, active and passive, arose from the first simple substance. Confirmation bias acknowledged. See the Trinity and Divine, or the Divine and Trinity explained. In the beginning, God said, without uttering a word, let there be such a creature. That is a lie. That is a lie. He said, Haya, let there be life. Right? And he became the life. Go back to Genesis if that is a problem for you. Right? That is not what he said. And he did utter a word according to the text. That word was logos, the word of creation. Haya. Let there be such a creature. And thereupon the simple was there. Then God created nature, or the primal material. After animals? Really? Right? This says, let there be a creature, and then we're going to create creation? Really? That's how that worked? Then God created nature, or the prima materia, the first passive or receptive principle in which everything was present in principle and in potency. That would be the Holy Spirit, as explained in my book and the video that is linked. In order to end this state of suspension, God created the causa agens, like to the circle of heaven, which he resolved to call light. So the light was third. Bruh. But this light received a certain sphere, the first creature, within its hollowness. The properties of the sphere were heat and motion. That would be the properties of light indeed, heat and motion. It was evidently the sun, whereas the cold and passive principle would correspond to the moon. But it doesn't. It corresponds to the void in which the moon resides. That's the big difference right there. Right? Most of this is a misunderstanding of that one concept, that one principle. That which absorbs is not the moon. It is understandable why it was placed in that position, but that is not the good representation of it. The good representation of it is the waters above, which were separated from the waters below. Footnote 229. I cannot refrain from pointing out the remarkable analogy that exists between Simon of Gitta and Pseudo-Apollonius on the one hand, and Lao Tzu on the other with regard to the Principia Mundi. The components of Tao are the masculine yang and the feminine yin, the one hot, bright, and dry like the sun, the other cold, dark, and moist like the new moon. The Tao Te Ching says of the original being, there was something formless, yet complete, that existed before heaven and earth, without sound, without substance, dependent on nothing, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing. One may think of it as the mother of all things under heaven. That would be the void. Not the moon, the void. We have done a partial study of the Tao Te Ching. I decided that it was not worth continuing because they did not have a good understanding of a lot of things. Back to the text. It seems to me not unlikely that the Dicta Bellini are connected with the passage from Artifius rather than with the Turba, since they have nothing to do with the sermons of Apollonius. They may therefore represent a tradition independent of the Turba, and this is the more likely since Artifius seems to have been a very ancient author of Arabic provenance. 230. He may even be identical with Signor, C.F. Stapleton and Hussein, Muhammad bin Umayl. He shares the doctrine of the simplex with the Liber Quattuorum. Footnote 231. Okay, we will not be back to footnotes till 239, which is probably of Heronite origin. I mentioned his theory of the creation here, despite the fact that it has no parallels in the dictum. It seemed to me worth noting because of its interconnection with the Apophis Megali of Simon Magus. The dicta are not concerned with the original separation of the natures, but rather with its synthesis, which bears much the same relation to the sublimation of the human mind, exalatio tatio intellectus, as the procedures of the Liber Quattuorum. Besides the connection between Luna and intellect, we must also consider their relation to Mercurius. For in astrology and mythology, Mercurius is the divine factor that has the most to do with hypnoia. The connections between them in alchemy have classical antecedents. Leaving aside the relation of Hermes to the Nous, I will only mention that in Plutarch, Hermes sits in the moon and goes round with it, just as Heracles does in the sun. In the magic papyri, Hermes is invoked as follows: O Hermes, ruler of the world, who dwellest in the heart, circle of the moon, round and square. Round and square. Right, that can refer to geometry, but that cannot refer to reality. Right? It isn't either round or square. In physical reality, this can be allegorical. That is fine. Right? The circle of the moon, round and square. In alchemy, Mercurius is the rotundum par excellence. Like circle in the square is how he is a way of understanding the masculine and the feminine. The circle being the feminine, the masculine being the square, right? And so circling the square is part of sacred geometry. It is perfectly understandable why people who were exploring sacred geometry would indeed make a reference to that. In alchemy, Mercurius is the rotundum par excellence. Luna is formed of his cold and moist nature, and Sol of the hot and dry. Alternatively, she is called the proper substance of Mercurius. From Luna comes the aqua mercurialis, or aqua permanens. With her moisture, like Mercurius, she brings the slain dragon to life. As we have seen, the circle of the moon is mentioned in the Super Arboreum Aristotelius, where a stork, as it were, calling itself the circle of the moon, sits on a tree that is green within instead of without. Footnote 139. Concerning the significance of the stork in Aurum Velis, says, the stork devours serpents, and its flesh is profitable against all poisons. I will point out that this is patently untrue. This is 100% not a real thing. Right? We saw many references in Agrippa to things that were considered to be true in alchemy that are absolutely not true at all, and some of them which are diametrically opposed to good ends. The stork is therefore a dragon killer and a symbol of the demon conquering moon. This symbol is also an attribute of the church. No, they took it upon themselves. It is not a good appellation. Here it is worth pointing out that the soul, whose connection with the moon has already been discussed. Actually, hold on. The church as the slayer of the moon, right, or not the dragon. The dragon is the light bringer, the understanding, the knowledge, the greater powers, the use of the magical powers, and yes, the church did indeed slay all of that. Alright, now back to the text. Here it is worth pointing out that the soul, whose connection with the moon has already been discussed, was also believed to be round. Thus, Caesarius of Histerbach says that the soul has a spherical nature, after the likeness of the globe of the moon. There is no reason to believe that. Dialogue on miracles. The moon is related to the soul by the further fact that it is the receptacle of souls. And I say there is no reason to believe that, but there is, actually, right? There is actually a sphere which encapsulates you. It is something that is visible if you are trained to observe it. It is something that can be measured by these rods, right? It is the aura. It is the divine chakra, in my understanding. It is something that you have access to. It is one of those things that the church did indeed slay. Your access to it only comes from understanding of things that the church will not let you understand. And so, in that understanding, it is perfectly aligned that the soul would be sphere. But that chakra is not actually the soul. It is the magnetic emanations of the Holy Spirit that bind you together, right? This holds together these. These allow access to that. And so they are intricately related. All of them are intrinsic to you personally. And so it is understandable why someone might understand that as the soul, but it is better expressed as the spirit. Right? Just to be clear on that. Let us now turn back to the question raised by the quotation in the Rosarium from the Dicta Bellini. It is one of those approximate quotations which are typical of the Rosarium. Footnote 241. See Psychology and Alchemy. In considering the quotation as a whole, it should be noted that it is not clear who the speaker is. The Rosarium supposes that it is Soul, but it can easily be shown from the content of the dicta that the speaker could just as well be the Filius Philosophium, since the woman is sometimes called Soror, sometimes Mater, and sometimes Uxor. This strange relationship is explained by the primitive fact that the son stands for the reborn father, a motif familiar to us from Christian tradition. The speaker is therefore the father's son, whose mother is the son's sister wife. And again, I will point out that this is an absolutely terrible allegory. According to the degree of our wisdom, is contrasted with your understanding. It therefore refers to the wisdom of the soul Redivius, and presumably also to his sister the moon, since our and not my wisdom. The degree is not only plausible, but is a concept peculiar to the opus, since soul passes through various stages of transformation from the dragon, lion, and the eagle to the hermaphrodite. Footnote 242. Now, again, hermaphrodite is only a good reference if you are talking about the combination of the two energies, masculine and feminine in perfect balance. That is the only acceptable use of hermaphrodite in these situations. Not a literal hermaphrodite that is both male and female. Those things do exist, but they are exceedingly small. And I'm not saying those things as a dehumanizing concept. Don't take it that way. Each of these stages stands for a new degree of insight, wisdom, and initiation, just as the Mithraic eagles, lions, and sun messengers signify grades of initiation. Unless ye slay me usually refers to the slaying of the dragon, the mortificato of the first dangerous, poisonous stage of the anima, freed from her imprisonment in the prima materia. 243. The dragon is born in the blackness and kills itself. The soul in chains occurs as early as the treatise of Soph the Egyptian. The divine soul bound in the elements. Now, bound is not quite the right word, but that is a good expression, right? You, as the soul, have a 5D navigation device. That would be the elements, right? This is composed of the Holy Spirit. It is your 5D navigation device, the temple of God, in which resides the representative of God, which is not God, but is a sliver individualized into you. Right? That works, but it is not in chains, right? That is victim mentality. We are not on a prison planet. This is not a punishment. You are not even bound here. Whenever you get done with this 5D navigation device, there are new options open to you. All right, back to the text. This anima is also identified with soul. 244. We place the soul of the world, especially in the sun, as the representative of the two powers combined, the hermaphroditic part. Fine, but not really, right? We have our own magnetics here. There is no reason to place the soul of the world outside of the world. There's really not. Soul is frequently called Rex, king, and there is a picture showing him being killed by 10 men. 245. See figure 8 in Milius and figure 101 in Stolzenberg. He thus suffers the same mortificato as the dragon, with the difference that it is never a suicide. For soul, insofar as the dragon is a preliminary form of the Filius Solus, is in a sense the father of the dragon, although the latter is expressly said to beget itself and is thus an increatum. 246. Psychology and Alchemy. We will not be back here until 252. At the same time, soul, being his own son, is also the dragon. Accordingly, there is a coniguum of the dragon and the woman, who can only be Luna or the lunar feminine half of Mercurius. As much as soul, therefore Luna, as the mother, must be contained in the dragon. Right now, if the dragon contains soul and Luna, what would that be? The white, penetrative powers, the dark, absorptive powers, both of which coming into accordance by forming a double helix through your spine, would be the dragon, right? Serpentine, even. Sinuous, even. Moving, flowing, even. That is true. And so, as a representative of soul and Luna, the dragon works. To my knowledge, there is never any question of her mortificato in the sense of a slaying. And that, right, that is what the church killed. Not a literal dragon, not Satan, not a demon, but your ability to manifest healing within your own life. Instead, you need to go to the church to get that done. Nevertheless, she is included with soul in the death of the dragon, as the Rosarium hints. The dragon dieth not, except with his brother and his sister. The idea that the dragon or soul must die is an essential part of the mystery of transformation. The mortificatio, this time only in the form of a mutilation, is also performed on the lion, whose paws are cut off, and on the bird, whose wings are clipped. It signifies the overcoming of the old and obsolete, as well as the dangerous preliminary stages which are characterized by animal symbols. In interpreting the words, "Your understanding increases in my sister," etc., it is well to remember that a philosophical interpretation of myths had already grown up among the Stoics, which today we should not hesitate to describe as psychological. This work in the Stoics were not correct, right? The Stoics were deniers. Right? There is a balance to be stricken between all things. There is a time to use anger. There is a time to use lust. There is a time to use all of the virtues and the vices. There are things that you should eat, and you should have emotions. The Stoics, from my understanding of them, were not aligned in that particular way. They were deniers of half of the self in many of the ways that should be assimilated into yourself. Right? Now, they were doing so in an effort to achieve something, and they got a little bit of it, but they were completely unbalanced, and that is why it is not an effective thing. Right? There are times to act stoic, but you should not live your life as a stoic. This work of interpretation was not interrupted by the development of Christianity, but continued to be assiduously practiced in rather different form, namely in the hermeneutics of the Church Fathers, which was to have decided influence on alchemical symbolism. Yes, because if you did not use the Church's symbolism, you get to die. The Johannine and die quite painfully in most cases, right? The Church invented all kinds of incredibly torturous ways to kill their heretics. Anyone who did not use the correct alchemical symbolism or descriptors would indeed be subjected to those torturous devices. The Johannine interpretation of Christ as the pre-worldly logos is an attempt of this kind to put into other words the meaning of Christ's essence. Now, once again, I will point out that everyone is an equal representative of the logos, but no one has ever been the definitive logos. When the Word was with God, that was not a person. And if that is confusing, I will refer you once again to the standalone video that will be linked in the corner above and in the box down below. All right. The later medievalists, and in particular the natural philosophers, made the Sapientia Dei the nucleus of their interpretation of nature and thus created a new nature myth. In this, they were very much influenced by the writings of the Arabs and the Heronites, the last exponents of Greek philosophy and Gnosis, whose chief representative was Tabit ibn Qurra in the 10th century. One of these writings, the Liber Ptonis Quatorum, is a dialogue in which Tabit, speaks in person. In this treatise, the intellect as a tool of natural philosophy plays a role that we do not meet again until the 16th century in Gerhard Dorn. Pico della Mirandola appeals to the psychological interpretation of the ancients, and mentions that the Greek Platonist describes soul as this word and Luna as this word, terms that are reminiscent of Simon's, nous, and epinoia. That is 253. I think that's where we were going back. All right. 251 was thought, intellect, and mind. That was the first word. The second one is opinion, view, notion. Right? Those are different. Right? Thought, intellect, mind are cognition, opinion, view, and notion are results. Pico adds, according to the principles of their teaching. 253. In the same place, Pico mentions that Plato and certain younger philosophers interpreted soul as active intellect, but the moon as potential intellect. That actually makes more sense, right? There's a difference between intuition and intellect, right? Or intellect or intuition and thought. Intuition is the flash of inspiration. Thought is the cognition on that flash, right? It is not the actual bam, there's a new thing. It is the rumination upon that new thing that you've got intuition about. And so those are different, right? One is potential intellect, that flash of intuition, that is potential becoming realized. And you thinking about that is the active intellect. Now, it is understandable, moon, feminine, possibilities, generative, that would be potential. Soul, penetrative, creative, would be the active intellect. It makes sense. We'll be back to the footnotes at 257. Pico himself defines the difference as that between scientia and opinio, right? Conclusion and possibility. He thinks that the mind, animus, turning towards the spirit, spiritus, of God, shines, and is therefore called soul. The Spirit of God corresponds to the aqua superiores, the waters above the firmament. No, it doesn't. Like, it might in their understanding, but that is not true, right? The Spirit of God is quite literally every single thing in existence, all at the exact same time. The Logos is that in motion, right? And so that is not the waters above the firmament. Now, there is a separation of the waters below from the waters above, and we reside between those, right? This air is not the waters above. That is the void. That is the darkness of space. That is the waters above. We are separated from that. There is something, magnetics, that keep that from coming down upon us. Our magnetics protects us and it keeps our atmosphere here. That would actually be the Holy Spirit, the soul of the earth, keeping things together. And so this is not going to be quite right. Right? The Spirit of God is not the waters. It is, right? Because the Spirit is everything, but it is not because it is not that specific thing. Genesis 1:7. But insofar as the human mind turns towards the waters under the firmament, aqua inferiores, it concerns itself with the sensuales potentia, whence it contracts the stain of infection and is called luna. What was the number we were going back on? 257. Right. In both cases, it is clearly the human spirit or psyche, both of which have, however, a double aspect. One facing upwards to the light and the other downwards to the darkness ruled by the moon. The sun to rule the day, the moon also to govern the night. And while, says Pico, we wander far from our fatherland and abide in this night and darkness of our present life, we make most use of that which turns us aside to the senses, for which reason we think many things rather than know them. A pessimistic, no doubt accurate view that fully accords with the spiritual benightedness and sinful darkness of the sublunary world, which is so black that the moon herself is tarnished by it. That would be a pessimistic view. that humanity through sinfulness can corrupt the world? No. We do wander far from our fatherland and abide in the night and darkness of our present life, right? For most people, there is no awakening process. There is no real seeking of the light. For most people, You do indeed abide in the darkness of your present life. Instead of seeking to know things rather than to think many things, right? This is the part that is residing in the dark, right? For which reason we think many things rather than know them. The moon appears to be in a disadvantageous position compared with the sun. The sun is a concentrated luminary. The day is lit by a single sun. The moon, on the other hand, is as if less powerful, needs the help of the stars when it comes to the task of composition and separation, rational reflection, definition, etc. Footnote 257. Ibid. The idea of the inner firmament is a symbol of the unconscious, nature of the psyche, Paracelsus, and the physician. The appetites as potentiae sensualis pertain to the sphere of the moon. They are anger and desire, wrath and love, or in another word, concupiscencia. The passions are designated by animals because we have these things in common with them, and what is more unfortunate, they often drive us into leading a bestial life. 258. Pico adds, hence this saying of the Chaldees, the beasts of the earth inhabit thy vessel, and in Plato's Republic we learn that we have at home diverse kinds of brutes. See up the text from Origen. The English mystic John Portage speaks in his Sophia of the horrible people in the soul. According to Pico, Luna has an affinity with Venus, and is particularly to be seen from the fact that she is sublimated in Taurus, the house of Venus, so much that she nowhere else appears more auspicious and more beneficent. That is just you. 259. Heptalpus. Again, I refer you to my rant a little bit earlier about astrology. This is reliant upon an understanding that may not be true. Again, I do not have a full knowledge, but I have found no reason at all to believe that that would be true. Taurus is the house of the hierogamy of Sol and Luna. 260. CFD. Modus hieroglyphia. And when the semicircle of the moon was brought to be the complement of the sun, there was evening, and there was morning one day. Be that day, therefore, the first on which made the light of the philosophers. The union of sun and moon gives the sign for Taurus, ruler of the house of Venus. The marriage of day and night is the reason for the rather rare designation of the lapis as the filius unius day, son of one day. Indeed, Pico declares that the moon is the lowest earth and the most ignoble of all the stars. Footnote 261. We hold, therefore, the moon to be the lowest earth and the most ignoble of all stars, as is the earth very like to it by the opacity of all its elements, and by its blemishes. The lowest earth and the most ignoble of all the stars, an opinion which recalls Aristotle's comparison of the moon with the earth. The moon, says Pico, is inferior to all the other planets. 262. And we know the moon to be inferior to all. Know is a big word, right? If you are talking about things that are not verifiably, you don't know them. You assume them, you guess them. I may even make that mistake sometimes. I try to correct myself if I do, right? I try to remain the things that are in here I firmly believe, but they are speculative until other people prove them. And that is a process which is happening. The novilunium is especially unfavorable as it robs growing bodies of their nourishment and in this way injures them. 263. That's nothing. Psychologically, this means that the union of consciousness, soul, with its feminine counterpart, the unconscious, Luna, has undesirable results to begin with. It produces poisonous animals such as the dragon, serpent, scorpion, basilisk, and toad. 264. A milder form of these is the salamander. Then the lion, bear, wolf, dog. 265. Often mentioned as the Coruscant dog, sun, and the Armenian bitch, moon. And finally, the eagle and the raven, 266. said to devour its own wings or feathers. The eagle is therefore a variant of the Ouroboros. It does not devour its wings or its feathers. It may pluck them in an effort to prune them, and it uses them to line its nest, but there is no reason to believe that they devour them at all. At all. The first to appear are the cold-blooded animals, then warm-blooded predators, and lastly birds of prey or ill-omened scavengers. The first progeny of the Matrimonium lunarium are all, therefore, rather unpleasant. That is relative. But that is only because there is an evil darkness in both parents which come to light in the children, as indeed often happens in real life. I remember, for instance, the case of a 20-year-old bank clerk who embezzled several hundred francs. His old father, the chief cashier at the same bank, was much pitied because for 40 years he had discharged his highly responsible duties with exemplary loyalty. 2 days after the arrest of his son, he decamped to South America with $1 million. So there must have been something in the family. Or, now, there is no reason to steal. That is a bad idea in almost every single case. If you are hungry and there is an apple tree, it is not stealing to feed yourself. It is stealing to take one for later, right? You can feed yourself. There is no problem with that. Everything else involving taking something from someone else is going to be wrong in every single case. But a 20-year-old bank clerk who embezzled several hundred francs, right? Maybe the father was trying to get restitution, right? Well, if I pay it back and you fire him, would that be okay? No, right? So the 20-year-old gets punished, and then this guy who has worked at this company for 40 years gets pissed off and he uses his knowledge to take the money. That does not in any way, shape, or form give responsibility to the father for the actions of the son, or give the son responsibility for the actions of the father. There is an explanation completely outside of something in the family. Now, could there have been something in the family? Yes, but if it was, would he have been there for 40 years? Probably not, right? And so that is not a direct one-on-one correlation, at least. We have seen in the case of Sol that he either possesses a shadow or is even a Sol Niger. As to the position of Luna, we have already been told what this is when we discussed the new moon in the Epistola Solis ad Lunam Crescentium, footnote 267, Senior de Chimica. Sol cautiously says, "If you do me no hurt, O moon," 268. Sol is mindful of the dangerous role of Luna. "No one torments me but my sister." The sun did not actually say that. I'm just pointing that out, right? The sun did not actually say anything. Luna has promised him complete dissolution when she herself coagulates. And, in addition to the sun did not say anything, the moon did not either. An example becomes firm and is clothed with his blackness. 269. Song of Songs. I am black but comely. And 1:6. I am black because the sun is but me is sometimes quoted. Now, this is probably the same problem that Moses had that led him to kill his sister, so they had to find an alternative source of water. If you didn't know, Moses, when they were fleeing Egypt, he found him a bride, even though he had one, right? He has a father-in-law back in Midian. He found him a bride among the Ethiopians, and it caused quite a bit of contention among the crew, right? Him and his brother and his sister, they fought about this thing. And Aaron got cursed with a plague, and Miriam got to die because he was dating a black chick, right? And that is something that those the black Hebrew nationals, those incredible racists, they wouldn't like that particular fact in the slightest bit. This is the same thing, right? And It is inherently racist too, because Song of Songs is that love song of slightly pornographic nature that is contained within the Bible. I am black, but comely, intimates that because you are black, you should not be attractive. And that's a little bit of a racist take upon that, I think. And yes, I am black because the sun burnt me. She assumes, in the friendliest manner, that her blackness comes from him. The matrimonial wrangle has already begun. Luna is the shadow of the sun with corruptible bodies. She is consumed, and through her corruption is the lion eclipsed. Footnote 270. Concilium consigili. According to the ancient view, the moon stands on the borderline between the eternal, ethereal things and the ephemeral phenomena of the earthly sublunar realm. Footnote 271. Commentary on the dream of Scipio. The moon, being the boundary of ether and air, is the demarcation between the divine and the mortal. That is an understandable assumption to make, even though the moon is quite outside of the boundary of air. Macrobius says, the realm of the perishable begins with the moon and goes downwards, again understandable. Souls coming into this region begin to be subject to the numbering of days and to time. That is also understandable, right? There is a difference between us and the lesser animals. There is no doubt that the moon is the author and contriver of mortal bodies. Footnote 272 is a reference to something else. Because of her moist nature, the moon is also the cause of decay. I do want to point out that there is absolutely no water on the moon. 273. The heat and dew of the moon turn flesh rotten. Macrobius Saturnalia. The loveliness of the new moon, hymned by the poets and church fathers, veils her dark side, which, however, could not remain hidden from the fact-finding eye of the empiricist. 274. The empirical method of physicians is a heresy, according to Isidore of Seville. There are 3 medical heresies, and of this one, he says, the second empirical method, the method of trial and error, was discovered by Asclepius. That is an interesting reference, right? That is saying that physical medicine is an abomination, right? That is something that is outside of the understanding that you already had about healing. That's interesting. The moon, as the star nearest to the earth, partakes of the earth and its sufferings, and her analogy with the Church and the Virgin Mary as mediators has the same meaning. Footnote 275. That is a reference to another book. She partakes not only of the earth's sufferings, but of its demonic darkness as well. Footnote 276. The mediating position of the moon in the Church is mentioned by the alchemist William Manitz. This comes about when the light of the moon begins to increase up to its 15th day, and then to decrease until its 30th, returning then into the horns until no light at all appears in it. According to this view, the moon is an allegory, signifies the church, which is bright on its spiritual side, but dark on its carnal. Note the due emphasis he lays on the 2 aspects of the moon. This is the spirit of scientific truth, as contrasted with the retouchings of the charismatic point of view, which plays such an unfortunate role in the 2 great Christian confessions. And that is going to bring us to the end of the first part of the moon. And there are 4 parts to this. They are all about the same length. It is going to be a long part. And so, hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not an intention, but it is not something that I apologize for. All I am trying to do is to, as best as I can, with the knowledge that I already hold, seek more knowledge and clarify the knowledge that is available. Some of these things make perfect sense according to what I already understand. Some of them make absolutely no sense, and I have hopefully been clear about why. Right? I don't want to just say no. I want to explain why. It may be that I miss that sometimes, but if so, then check the previous video because I've probably already covered it, and I'm just trying to keep it short. And so, If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was said, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of my book where I explain most of these things a little bit better, or directly consulting me with the link provided down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.